Hey everybody, it is Garrett with Poetic Artifacts, and today I figured I would start a new video series called The History of Rock and Roll. This is gonna encompass everything from like the early history, like preceding rock and roll, up to even hard rock and heavy metal, rock and roll as it is today, especially in the digital age. And hopefully there's a lot of information here. As always, some of this stuff can be personal observations over what I read or what I've come across with it. But ultimately, I hope that this serves to help people understand what rock music is, where it comes from, and why it kind of is the genre that it is. So, anyways, the history of rock and roll, precursors, um, old um, music, old like African hymns and chants sung by slaves here in the Americas back in the mid to late 1800s in particular. Obviously after slavery was abolished here in America, we had a lot of African Americans at the time switch over to still having to work on in the agricultural fields like cotton, picking cotton and whatnot. But they were ultimately also creating a lot of songs for themselves at the time, in order to kind of pass the time in the fields together. And this was one of the ways that they did it, was in singing these little chanting tunes and whatnot. And if you think of like blues music, a lot of blues music is improvisational. And so what we get before rock and roll becomes like rock and roll in and of itself is that sort of period of time where you have individuals singing these little chants with each other in like fields and whatnot, and then you have that switch to blues music, which is really, um, sort of dispersing a lot of the, um, or releasing a lot of the negative energy and cynicism in relation to the African American population at the time. Um, it was very much something that is, um, important to know in regards to rock and roll, because when we think of like blues music, we also think of people just simply, singing the blues, venting their frustrations of the world itself. Rock and roll has the same idea, or the same underlying concepts. Rock and roll is like a rebellious thing, music wise, genre wise, lyrically. But we get a lot of that from old um, hymns from slaves during the 1800s. And they carried a lot of those over from Africa initially and brought them over here. That's where we get the origins of blues music. Blues music leads into rock and roll. The other one that actually kind of influences rock and roll music as well, although it doesn't really influence it as much until later, is classical music. Now, classical music influences rock and roll probably in the 70s, starting in the 1960s and 70s. But initially, when rock and roll starts out, a lot of it is based on blues patterns, 12 bar blues, pentatonic scales, blues scales. Obviously, they're still going to end up using, major minor works, but the main thing with rock and roll is that it all has roots in the blues, and not specifically classical. Classical works its way in later, jazz does work its way in later. There are tad little sprinkles of it, or there would be tad little sprinkles of it, but you would have to dig to find those probably in the 50s and 60s and whatnot. Otherwise, with rock and roll, you get those origins from the old songs sung by slaves and then eventual sharecroppers in the 1800s. So that's kind of the precursors to rock and roll. And that'll kind of do it for this video. Hope this video was kind of informative. There's not really anything specific. In the next video, I'll get to more specifics, but that's kind of like origins Precursors or origin story. So yeah. Anyways, hope you all have a fantastic rest of your week or weekend, and